Welcome to episode 4 of No Reserve. Lest you think I'm a camera hog and egomaniac, I'm joined by our CMO, Vajra Kingsley. Here's the mic.
Welcome to episode 4 of
That's
No
enough.
Reserve. Okay, so Josh, it's 2021. You've somehow hired an employee. I can't believe I'm still here.
Well, you're my granddaughter, so it's like it's still family and friends.
Well, I feel honored to somewhat be taking on the mic, and I'm really excited to get a further look in terms of what you're interested in 2021. And I know...
NFTs?
Well, we'll see. I think it's more than NFTs. And I'm curious, I think we have an interesting segment coming up around someone you've been quite controversial about.
To find out more about KAWS and Koons, we went to the deserted Midtown offices of Alberto Mugrabi to talk to him and dial in with eminent curator Paul Schimmel from his new house in Los Angeles. No Reserve is joined by two of the greatest of all time. Paul Schimmel, curator, occasionally a dealer and advisor for the past 30, 40 years. I would argue that Paul is the best curator I've ever known, in America at least. Alberto Mugrabi, as a collector and a dealer, I would say you're maybe the greatest market maker of all time for artists in America. So welcome the two of you to this episode. 50 years from now, Paul, will KAWS be in the history books and be thought of as one of the great artists of the early part of the 21st century?
KAWS will definitely be in the history books, that's for sure. And as to being considered one of the greatest artists of the 21st century, to me it's not clear yet, because the career is still relatively young. I'm waiting for the next big move. I mean, the thing that's so interesting about Jeff is every time you turned around, you thought the career was over, and it was another career.
If you look at Jeff Koons' work, it's not only the balloon dog, it's not the puppy, it's not Michael Jackson, it's not the Pink Panther, it's not the basketballs in the tank. There's so many amazing masterpieces that this artist has created that, like, everything he does becomes an amazing obsession, and it's so influential on so many other artists. If you look at a sculpture that KAWS did in Japan in the mountains, where he invites people to go and camp with the piece, and these inflatable pieces that he puts in the river and lake in Hong Kong, it's a new way of doing sculpture. It's fascinating how people are excited about it, and they're just so into it.
What's absolutely clear is KAWS represents a completely different generation, and his is truly a public art. And the history of public art, to a great degree, has been defined by the patron, the context in which it was made, and that goes back to Assyrian art and to Egyptian, obviously. Public art has really never been able to be made privately until quite recently. Now, Koons makes public art, but he is absolutely a studio artist, and I don't see Koons being a whole lot different than Brancusi. As a matter of fact, I see more of Brancusi in Koons than I see Koons in KAWS.
So am I using an old-fashioned sort of MoMA history of art thing, thinking linearly like Cezanne, Picasso, Pollock, Johns? I just can't feel adding the next artist name in there as KAWS. Am I just looking at it in the wrong way with the wrong paradigm, Paul?
I don't think you're looking at it in the wrong way. I think it's the right paradigm. I think it is a really profoundly different context. And it is among the first generation of artists who've had the resources and the ability to create public art through not private patronage, but through self-patronage. I understand KAWS gets, people to help pay for things, but the truth is, he is making these works of art himself. I mean, he's closer in some ways to a Christo than he is to a Koons. Koons is a studio artist. KAWS is truly a post-studio artist, public art. And how he began in terms of, whether you call it street art or consumerist art, or it involved the public from the get-go. Jeff gives a lot of, lip service to the public, but ultimately his is really a studio practice. Now, it's a studio practice taken to a heroic level.
Latika, we're sitting with the greatest curator in the world. Ask Paul something, you don't get another free shot at this. He's usually pretty expensive to ask a question for.
Would you consider doing a Koons KAWS exhibition?
I have shown Jeff many times and would love to work with Jeff again. I've never shown KAWS, and I don't know him well enough to know what I could do with him. And what I mean by that is, I've done a lot of shows, but I've never really dealt with public art. Even when I did like performance shows, it was all about objects and kind of almost a hermetic thing. It is a huge, I did a Murakami who's like as, public as they get, and yet I presented him as being like, here's 250 things, 10 of which are friggin' masterpieces, paintings, that he spent like a year and a half on. I am so traditional in that way that I don't know how I could do him justice without fully understanding this notion of mass appeal. To me, uniqueness, rarity, exclusivity are things that I cannot separate from my know-how. So it's like I could see doing KAWS and Paul McCarthy, and I could see how I could do that, because I think they are both dealing with very public issues, and this kind of notion of public art looking like, from the standpoint of Satan or God. And I could see how I could play that off. Plus, they use the same inflatable company in the Netherlands.
Look, I promise you one thing. Next time you're in New York, I would love to take you over to meet Brian, because he's a fantastic guy. You would enjoy meeting him. And we can have lunch with him one day, take you to his studio. And I think you would enjoy meeting him.
I know I would.
Well, Tico, when you take Paul to Brian's,
yes,
remind Brian that it was me who put that together, since I'm sure
you can come to lunch with us as well.
I think I've been banned over the years for all my snarky remarks. So if I'm banned, just remind him that this connection between you and Paul over that was due to no reserve.
Hey, bringing me in to talk about KAWS may not help either your cause or my cause. No pun intended, actually.
So, Brian, here's to you. What do you think of what we just did? Am I coming to lunch or not? We are back at No Reserve for another segment of Sara Friedlander's hair. Welcome, Sara.
If you want to talk about hair, Josh, we've got to talk about, you've got like this wind-swept thing going on. It's very dapper.
It's the extensions that I'm wearing.
It looks great.
So they're in the plugs, they're really working.
It suits you.
Welcome back, Sara.
Thank you for having me.
It's a year into COVID. It's like, is New York no longer the center?
New York remains the center and always will be. I think this like mass exodus to Florida is short-lived.
Where are you going next week?
Well, I'm going to Florida next week, but I'm not moving to Florida.
Well, we're doing a lot in this episode about the art world in Palm Beach. Fortunately, I'm not going because there's no city in the country that I dislike more than Palm Beach, but it seems to be where it's going.
It has its charms. It's limited, but you know, a lot of what I do is go to Palm Beach when my clients go to Palm Beach. Like we kind of move in the same circles as our clients. So When people are in the Hamptons, we go to the Hamptons. When people are in Aspen, we go to Aspen. Like, it's pretty nice. So Palm Beach happens every winter, whether you want it to or not.
Okay, so next topic I'd like to ask you about is 50 years from now, KAWS or Koons?
Why can't it be both? It's got to be both, because Koons is already cemented in the books. Like, love him or hate him, he will always be there. And since the 80s, it's been a phenomenon, and the phenomenon never ends. I mean, the market will go up and down and dip and whatever. There'll be too much product, there won't be enough product. But, I mean, that first show he did, like, it's in the books forever. And I don't think KAWS is going anywhere either.
And I predict art fairs in the fall. Definitely happening.
I think the first one people go to is December, Miami.
I say Basel, September. Not everybody, but
Not
enough
everyone.
to do it.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that.
And we're taking votes for what Sarah's hair should be like next time.
I'm thinking maybe like I shave it all off.
Just half.
Just half. Or gray like you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd put the gray in.
And the extensions.
And the extensions. And here are some shows that Sara recommends.
So for one of our segments, I got the pleasure of going all of the way to Palm Beach and Miami. I'd love to hear a little bit about why you wanted to go to Palm Beach and check out this kind of new pop-up scene that we're seeing down there.
Well, I was hoping Palm Beach would not become the new center of the art world, because personally, I don't like to have dinner at 4 o'clock, and I like better beaches, but I recognized that that's where the momentum was, and I was worried that Palm Beach would suddenly replace New York for 4 or 6 months in the winter. For this segment of No Reserve, we headed down south to Florida, the new art capital of the world. So, No Reserve would like to welcome Brett Gorvy. Most of you know him as the world's best Instagram influencer in the art world. Some of us who are a little older know him by things like former chairman of contemporary and post-war art at Christie's, partner in the world-famous Levy-Gorvy Gallery. So Palm Beach, is that the new center of the art world and the art market?
I think for the moment, it's a complete. It's been very interesting having the difference between being down here in New York. I mean, I came down here on Tuesday, leaving freezing New York to the beautiful sunshine of Palm Beach, and the difference is literally night and day, because you have people very comfortable coming into a gallery space, very comfortable spending time. So it feels actually much more like a Saturday in New York in the more traditional sense of doing the gallery hop. And I think that is both surprising, but also it's incredibly enriching, because it allows you to bring great art and have a conversation.
Well, you're a global gallery, so you have Hong Kong, London, Paris.
So the way that we've really looked at it is, and again, if you follow me around the last few weeks, my team have heard me saying the same thing, which is basically the 3-word mantra that I have is platform, content, and trigger. And I think that really has been, for us, the most important element of last year is looking for the platform that works. So we've been very much using the fact that we have these galleries around the world. Anytime we have an open, so for instance, Paris at the moment is open, we've been able to use that as a way of engaging with clients and creating a beautiful exhibition program around it. London is shut, so we have to basically pivot very quickly. And I think that's most galleries, the auction houses, it's been pivoting. How do you dance very quickly and be flexible?
So online viewing rooms become a little less important within that platform idea?
I think a lot of the things that we tested last year have become stale. So whether at the online viewing rooms, the amount of collectors that I spoke to who never went on, however much they were encouraged, if the professionals went onto these platforms, but we saw after a certain time. And I think it's the same thing with the auctions. The amount of people who told me that they missed major auctions because why were they having a New York auction starting at 10 a.m. on a Friday? It just doesn't make sense in terms of creating that sense of occasion. Something where there's a moment. And it's interesting, today it was announced, or I think it was yesterday announced, that Christie's are selling a Basquiat as a single lot object in a Hong Kong audience. what prompted that? Was that ultimately the consignor who's made that decision? Is it because they see that as the best platform? So again, to my trio of mantras, is the platform there? They've got the content and the painting, but everyone is looking for that secret, which is basically how do you create the trigger? What is actually making people feel that there's an urgency to buy and to stretch? Because I think, it's very difficult to stretch when you're not in love, and it's very difficult to fall in love virtually. Both Dominic and I, are very privileged in a way that we both grew up through the auction system. So not only is it about the relationships that we have, but obviously we know where a lot of the paintings are or the works of art. We've sold many of these works, and then they're coming back to us because of that. So I think it's not so much that we view ourselves in direct competition with them. I don't think we often think of that. We're obviously just thinking about how we're dealing with that particular client. They're wanting to sell. Do they want to sell publicly? Do they want to sell privately? And we saw last year in particular, a lot of clients or sellers wanted the private route because they felt that it was a more safer, and frankly, they weren't getting the big guarantees that they were getting prior to from the auction houses. And so a private sale was not only safer, but actually a more efficient way of selling. I think last year we saw actually two very different markets appearing. We saw, again, people stretching for the trophies, and again, that was very, very important. But we saw also the sort of what I call secondary primary works flipping very, very quickly, and we being able to be the in-between in several deals. But the appetite specifically from Asia was for this younger material, and you were often seeing, not so much wet paint, but certainly works of art that were created in the last 2 or 3 years coming into the market, whether it's coming from primary sources or ultimately coming as the auction houses are also benefiting from this type of material. But that content is really in hot demand, and again, it's both the vitality of that material, that there's an interest, especially from the younger collectors, because that's the other thing that we've seen in Asia is this much younger demographic of buyer, competing with the older collector. And that allows us in a way to bring two types of category of work to the market. The younger, less expensive material, which ultimately has a much broader spectrum of buyers. So we've seen obviously the day sales in the auction houses have also profited greatly from this type of buying mentality. And then on the other end, it's about couture, haute couture, finding that exact work for the collector. And the other thing we've seen in Asia is the growth of museums and the private foundations. That's always been a strong part of the last 2 or 3 years, but we've now seen even greater interest, and we're seeing interest from museums in Japan, in Korea, in Hong Kong. We've got the M+ finally opening. So all of these things are very important, but it's the balance between private and institutional, and I think that's what makes it so exciting in Asia, is that you've got both those forces at once.
In our New York, Florida theme, we think of New York as the philanthropic center of the world, but in fact, there are great things being done in South Florida. So we decided to check one out. Welcome, Sara. Tell us how it's been in South Florida.
It's actually very interesting. It kind of feels like COVID doesn't exist in South Florida, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Things here are open, people are out. And because of that, it has led to a lot of people from the art world being down here. So many galleries have opened up pop-ups in Palm Beach, and there are a number of kind of outdoor exhibits that are popping up really all over down here. A lot of gallerists, artists, collectors have all ended up concentrated down here, which I think has led to a pretty vibrant scene down here where it might not otherwise be like that right now.
You're on an enormous number of boards like MoMA, PS1, and many different cultural boards. And I noticed that you reached out immediately last spring with COVID relief grants. I think you raised, what, $20 million that you gave out to artists, not just in Miami?
It became apparent very quickly when COVID hit, and realizing that this was not something that was going to go away in a few weeks, which I think is what a lot of us thought when news about it was first coming out. It became really apparent that artists were going to be some of the hardest hit. You know, you heard a lot about restaurant or hospitality workers, but you didn't really hear about artists. And so, you know, Young Arts, an organization which I chair, which is headquartered in Miami, but we're a national organization. We work with artists from all across the country. We have year-round programming in Miami, New York, LA, DC, and Aspen. We knew that we had to do something, not only to help kind of our alumni who had gone through our programs, but really the artist community at large. And we knew that we couldn't do this alone. So we formed a coalition with 6 other arts non-for-profits, and these, you know, they're across all disciplines. They are organizations who we've kind of always known and respected, and you know, maybe thought that we could someday do something together, but really didn't quite know what it was. But we came together in mid-March, and we started with a kind of seed magic grant for the Mellon Foundation for $5 million. We raised another $5 million in 2 weeks, and on April 8th, we launched Artist Relief Fund with $10 million. And it was $5,000 unrestricted grants, and these were not, you know, to continue a body of work or keep your studio up. These were for basic human necessities, you know, food, healthcare, shelter, and we ended up raising another $10 million through the end of December, and continuing to give out grants that way. But, you know, we received 160,000 applications, and while $20 million sounds like a lot, compared to 160,000 requests, and these were all, again, people who were in kind of dire circumstances, it was a drop in the bucket.
How do you feel, given that environment of need, given the political environment of the last year, to at the same time be collecting art as a collector?
I don't think I buy enough to really be considered a collector, but I do love having art in my home. You know, the way that I always approached it, I would say that probably 95% of work that I own, I know the artist. Maybe I've been to their studio, maybe I've collaborated with them through Young Arts or some other organization that I work with, but they're definitely, you know, people I've spent time with and gotten to know, and so I love having that very personal component where I don't just see a piece of art on the wall, I see kind of a whole history and relationship when I look at it. And I think that's probably why I would also never sell anything in my collection, because of that personal component. And something that I always thought about, and I think became even more prevalent during the pandemic, was about supporting the ecosystem as a whole. And so, you know, when buying a piece, I would really consider, like, what is the gallery that I'm buying it from? Is it from a big gallery who probably this isn't going to matter to them, or is it from a small gallery that maybe they're going to, because of that sale, they're going to be able to continue to rent their space? And so being really thoughtful about that, about supporting the ecosystem as a whole, from, you know, the smaller galleries to then the artist as an individual. You know, if you're buying a very well-established artist, it kind of is not going to make an impact. However, if you're buying a kind of younger, more emerging artist, you know, that sale means a lot, both financially and otherwise. And so I think just being thoughtful about how are you supporting that whole ecosystem, and allowing, you know, the smaller galleries that are out there discovering artists to continue, and allowing, you know, those more emerging artists to continue working, I think is something that's really exciting.
Do you have some personal favorites, or are they all your children and you can't pick amongst them?
I don't think I can pick. 2 pieces that I really love. They're an artist named Deborah Roberts, who she's incredible. She, you know, I think the past couple years has just skyrocketed, you know, with a lot of attention. I think Beyonce bought one of her pieces. I was lucky enough to get a couple of pieces, because I think it's probably really hard to get pieces from her now, from a small gallery in New York in Meatpacking called Fort Gansevoort. But that's kind of where you start to find these gems at these small galleries, because they are out there finding these artists that are definitely more emerging. There's a piece in my kitchen by Hank Willis Thomas, who is somebody who I am in awe of. I don't know how he has enough time in the day to do everything that he does, because in addition to being a great artist, you know, he's also, you know, he founded Four Freedoms. He's now doing the Wide Awakes. You know, he is active in so many different ways. We do have a Jose Parla in Aspen. So Jose is another one who met through, I think we met through Young Arts. He's been a Young Arts mentor every year. Now he's working on our social sculpture project. He is so generous with his time with the winners and alumni. And so through that, he's become a really dear friend. And again, somebody just, I feel lucky to know and kind of inspired by every time we sit down and have a conversation.
That was great talking to Sara. It's great to see we have collectors who are not thinking about being speculators and who don't sell the works and value their relationship directly with the artist.